I'm really so overwhelmed by the fact that all of you are here. You made the time to come here and to listen to Tom. We're so touched by Mr. Liza Manik's family for being here and also for supporting this event. My name is Hume, and I am a volunteer for the Save Maldives campaign, which is an environmental campaign. We have been trying to keep alive since 2017. We raise public awareness about issues that affect the environment, especially on degradation of the environment, loss and damage to the environment, and all other risks that are, our environment and our ecosystems are threatened with today. And I don't want to say a great deal except to say, Save Maldives campaign and the Global Coral Reef Alliance is collaborating to hold this event on behalf of Tom. So without too much talk, I will pass on to Tom to take it down. Okay. Over to you, Tom. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hume. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet the Manikou family. A real pleasure. I don't know who of you here are Manicous. You raise your hand. Sorry, yes. Okay, good, wonderful, a pleasure. And then my great friend Aziz Hakim and my old friend Abdullah Nasir. So it's a pleasure to be here again. So let me just jump into it. Just very briefly, I'm going to be, am I speaking loudly enough for everyone? Okay, so I'm going to be showing the results of the project that we did here at Ihuru. And it was Hassan Manikou who was responsible for it. I'll tell that story as we go. So that's very closely linked to him. And this is the first time we have ever had a chance to present our results here in the Maldives. I mean, this is, so this project, let me move ahead. In honor of Hassan Manikou. I met him in 1996, the first time I came to the Maldives. And I came with Professor Wolf Hilberts, who was an architect, at Hassan Manikou's invitation, because he heard about the work we were doing, growing coral reefs and producing building materials in the sea. And we work in Jamaica. I'm from Jamaica, the island in the Caribbean. And Wolf Hilberts, to backtrack, was an architect who was a visionary, and he discovered a way to grow limestone in the sea, okay, of any size or shape. I'll show you some examples. And he invented this process in 1976, and his idea was to grow limestone blocks in the sea and then take them out and use them as building material. Okay? And then in 1987, I heard about his work, and I invited him to come to Jamaica to work with me applying it to coral reef restoration. We did that for a number of years. Then in 96, Hassan Manikou invited us to come here to the Maldives. So I'll tell that story now. I'm going to begin with Hassan's own pictures. Okay, this is from his website, and I think you may know it. This is a sample that Wolf Hilberts gave to Hassan in 1996. And what it is I can use a pointer so I don't stand the screen. This is a piece of limestone rock grown in the sea. Okay, this wasn't grown in the Maldives, but the photograph was taken in the Maldives because it's a piece that he gave to Hassan, and I hope the family still has it. I don't know where it is. But what it shows is solid limestone rock that he grew in the sea in Texas or Louisiana or someplace in the Gulf of Mexico. And it was covered with oysters that spontaneously settled on it, and they grew to adult size in about 3 months. Okay, and it's extraordinary. And they weren't put on there. They just spontaneously settled and grew. And these are Hassan's pictures. What we did is we started a project at Ihuru Island, and I'll come back to that story as to why we did it. But these are his own photos from his own website, taken in 1997. And what it is, it shows a structure built of steel, welded together, and we call this the barnacle. Just like a big dome. And this is when it was just built on the beach at Ihuru. And close-ups. He was obviously interested in the structure and the aesthetics of it, and then it was carried into the sea and floated out. And we put it out in front of the reef on the fore slope of the reef and sailing it out. And obviously it was quite a tourist attraction. Everyone wanted to know, what was happening there. And this is also illustrates how Hassan Manikou fully understood the implications, because let me go back. Sorry. All around the Maldives, of course, people are building seawalls out of rebar. Okay, our structure is made out of rebar, but we don't use any concrete. Okay, concrete's expensive, it's imported, and each ton of concrete produces a ton of CO2 into the atmosphere, so it's a very bad material for a lot of reasons. And this is how people make seawalls traditionally. But what Hassan Manikou recognized is that we could take something like this, put a little trickle charge of electricity. Now that's our secret, is an electrical charge, one that you don't feel. It's not alternating current, that kills you. Not high voltage, not high frequency, not high, amplitude, nothing. We use extremely low voltage currents, like what you get from a 6-volt battery. Okay, and no one's afraid of being killed by a 6-volt battery. It's direct current. It's completely safe. In fact, you can't even feel it in the water. It's such a low level, and that's very important. Now that does two things. First of all, it stops all of the rusting on the steel, and the electrical charge prevents the rusting. And then when we apply more current, then what first happens is the red color disappears. It turns to gray and black because the iron oxide is turned back to iron. And then it turns white because then limestone rock grows over it, which is the natural rock that the Maldives are made from. That's what corals are made from, what the old buildings in the Maldives are made from. And so we grow the limestone from the sea. We don't make any concrete. We just get an electrical source, we charge it, and we let it grow. Now, we try to do it very slowly. We try to do it not more than 1 to 2 centimeters a year. That way we get material that is 2 to 3 times harder than ordinary concrete. Okay? It's solid rock. I would have brought a piece from this project, but it was too heavy to carry, But anyway, it's a solid, hard rock. We can grow it much faster. I'll come back to that, but basically then you produce a soft material that you can use as cement. Okay, and it absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere directly and turns into an even harder rock than limestone. So we can produce both rocks and cement depending on the conditions we do it under. But that's quite high. The biological benefits, which I'm going to show you, are better at even lower levels. So we try to grow it, almost as slowly as we can. We don't try to speed it up. People who imitate our work try to speed it up, and then they get bad results. So that's another story. So anyway, so what Hassan recognized was that we could be growing seawalls all around the Maldives, say using solar panels, very easily. And he understood the full implications of this because, as you know, Hassan Manikou is also an architect. Okay, that's why he understood the implications right away. So those are his own pictures from the family website, and I've pretty much done all of them. But this book is the most famous book on the Maldives of aerial pictures by Michael Friedel, and it shows Ihuru here, and that's Babin Faru, and these are classical images of the Maldives as they used to be. Before dredging, huh? And that's Ihuru Island when it was completely undeveloped. I think people may have broken a passage through to get boats here, but other than that, the reef was completely intact. No one lived there, no hotels. And then, of course, now there's a hotel. Okay, now, and what they began to suffer is the erosion that every island in the Maldives has. It's inevitable. We have rising sea levels and rising storm strength. It's inevitable that all these islands are eroding. And so what they were doing is they were spending a lot of money pumping sand from one end of the island to the other with every switch of the monsoons. Every 6 months, they'd pump the beach from one end of the island to another, and putting sandbags and all sorts of stuff to protect the island from eroding. Now, Ihuru isn't in this picture. This is Male, and we're over here somewhere, and Ihuru is off in this direction. But this is the plume of a dredging boat, And the thing is, those plumes move with the winds and currents. And depending on which way they're moving, they sweep across the whole atoll. They affect Ihuru as well. And so, you can see it with the mud. What you don't see is the sewage outfalls from Mali, which are also in this area. And that's what they're dredging up right now, is sewage contaminated sediment. Okay, now, no one tells you that, but that's what they're using for landfill. And the sewage outfalls are in this area. And when I came in the first time in 1996, we went over the sewage outfalls. And of course, the sewage goes in fresh water, so it boils right up to the surface. And you can see all the little particles and plastic and stuff floating in it. And you would see the plumes. And again, those sweep across this whole southern end of the atoll. So there was a serious pollution problem. Now they're dredging and filling in this island here. And well, when the EIA was done for the dredging, they didn't mention anything about this being polluted mud or polluted water or anything. When they put the EIA out, every dive shop in the atoll was asked to comment on what they thought, would result from it. And every one of them, in their own words, said, one, that they had personally seen damage to their own diving sites from dredging, and they were really worried about any more because they didn't think, the reefs could take much more. Now, at the time that I came, the reefs were as perfect as they ever were here. I mean, the Maldives is the paradise of corals in the Indian Ocean, or it was. I mean, it's absolutely the best conditions for coral growth in the Indian Ocean. I've dived, all around. So I've been diving for 70 years, 70, okay, since I was a very small boy. And my father and grandfather took most of the photographs of coral reefs in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. So I have the world's largest collection of old reef photographs: Bikini Atoll, the Great Barrier Reef, the Mariana Islands, Jamaica, of course. Not the Maldives, because my grandfather and father never got here. There was no airport in those days, of course, and, no diving here. So I don't have any old photos of the Maldives. In fact, nobody does. Nobody does. And come back to that. Well, let me mention, the first photographers who came here, if you look at their photographs, Hans Haas, for instance, he came in 1958, and I've looked through all the pictures. There's almost no good pictures of coral reefs there. There are pictures of fish, pictures of people spearing fish, and there's a few corals out of focus in the background, but you don't really see the reef itself. So that's a problem with the old pictures. I mean, these guys were spear fishermen, shooting fish. So now, when I came here to Ihuru, the guy who was running the dive shop there, Robert, and I don't remember his last name, but anyway, Hassan brought us to Ihuru because Aziz Hakim was growing corals there on Ihuru. And see, maybe I'm going to show you the photographs of that project now. Okay, so let me backtrack. So, well, let's go ahead. Okay, so these are some of the applications that we have that we've found. We invented this technology in Jamaica, and then in Panama, which is my other country, and then we came to the Maldives, and we realized this was the ideal place for what we do. And the applications of it are here in the Maldives are many. I mean, first of all, we grow corals faster. They have higher survival from bleaching. I'll show you the pictures. We increase the biodiversity because we attract the settlement of all marine organisms. They're attracted to the electrical field. It gives them good health and strength, so they survive conditions that they don't otherwise. Because we're able to build structures of any size or shape from steel, we bend them, we weld them, you only saw one example, but you'll see more. We grow, and I'll show you in Ihuru, we grew a reef in front of a severely eroded beach, and the beach grew back by itself very quickly. We don't know how quickly because we only got pictures after it had gone back, so we don't have the time. But we grow back those beaches without any pumping or dredging, simply by growing a reef that dissipates the wave energy before it hits the shore. And the result is, instead of washing the sand away, it deposits the sand. So this is a method that can save the Maldives because we can grow the stuff up 1 or 2 centimeters a year, which is faster than sea level rise. So we can build structures that will always keep up with sea level rise unless that accelerates a great deal, which it will if we don't do something about global warming. but that's another issue. But in addition, it's perfect for sustainable mariculture and tuna stock enhancement. I'll come back to that at the end. Okay, we can make floating reefs. Okay, for example, I've lived in all the atoll countries, by the way. I've lived in the Marshall Islands, in Kiribati and Tuvalu, and we have prepared major projects for the governments of Kiribati and Tuvalu to build Biorock reefs to protect large floating solar panel arrays that the Asian Development Bank wants to fund there. And the Maldives is going to try to move the same way for floating solar panels. It's really the best alternative. Now, we can use any source of electricity. We can use conventional electricity, which we don't like to do, especially if it's made from fossil fuels, because that defeats our purpose, you know. But in many cases, we don't have any choice, because it's the easiest and it's already there. But we can use solar power. We've done work with wind, with waves, with ocean currents. The problem with those technologies, they're too expensive. And because they depend on mechanical action, they're prone to failure, and then they're very expensive to fix and very difficult. So they'll never compete with solar. The solar has gone down so much in price, and there are no moving parts. It lasts forever unless you throw a rock at it, you know? So we're really trying to develop solar power where we can and where there's space for solar panels, which there isn't on the small resort islands, you know? So they don't want to cover their beach with solar panels. So, and we also, as I mentioned, we grow harder and cheaper carbon negative building materials, unlike concrete. And we can basically, this technology can be locally developed to generate a sustainable Maldivian blue economy. That's really what we hope to see and what Hassan would have wanted to see. That's sort of an overview. This is a piece that we grew here at Ihuru. We cut it out with a hacksaw. And what you see is, this has been in the sea at this point for like about 2 years. There's no rusting on the steel. It's protected from rusting. And then this is solid rock that we've grown over it, okay? So no rusting. And these pieces here all came from Ihuru. We cut them out, except that piece, which came from Louisiana. Sorry, I don't mean to stand in front of the screen. That piece there came from Louisiana and was covered with oysters spontaneously. And it's another piece that, you know, similar to the one that he gave to Hassan Manikou. In this case, this is from Ihuru. I wedged a coral between these two bars, and it grew so fast it actually smothered the coral. So that's too fast. The reason Hassan was interested in this is, of course, coral rock was a traditional building material here in the Maldives for thousands of years. It was the only building material people had. Okay? In this case, they're using Portland cement to cement it together, but in the old days, they would burn corals to make the quicklime, so the corals provided both the rock and the cement. And that was not a problem in the thousands of years people have lived here, because there was a lot of corals and few people. It was not a problem that they would mine the reef, but of course, Male was the first place they mined out the reefs, and they mined them as close as they can because it's heavy to carry. So they mined out the reefs around Male, and then Male flooded due to a storm someplace near Antarctica. And at that point, well, okay, this is a backtrack here. This is a close-up that Wolf took of a building, but again, it's Portland cement, not quicklime, but you get the idea. But that's what we want to replace. We want to replace that with material that we grow naturally, that costs less, grown here in the sea and not imported. Now, after Male flooded, then the Japanese government came in with the seawall around, and now that's a beach around Male. It costs $13 million per kilometer, and all of the Japanese foreign aid went to Male, not to any of the other 1,200 islands. Okay, so the other people didn't get seawalls. Not then. I mean, later, you know, later they realized that it's missing, but that's the beach now. So that's what we want to replace, is all that concrete. This is Furanafushi, the island just north of Hulhumale. And like many Maldivian resorts, it's surrounded by a dead reef because people mined the reef, piled the corals up, and they built breakwaters because all the beaches were washing away. Oh. And that was in 1996, the first time we came to the Maldives. And we stayed here because it was close to Male, so we could meet with Hassan. And these seawalls are very bad because they reflect the waves, and that causes erosion and scour. It washes away all the sand in front of the structure because of the reflection of the waves. And then it washes away the sand underneath, and the whole thing settles and collapses, and then they have to rebuild it all. So it causes erosion. It protects what's behind as long as it stands, but eventually it falls down. Every seawall that has ever been built, either has fallen down or will. Okay, so this is really a very poor technology, quite apart from destroying a reef. And then what they did is they covered it with gabion wires, what they call gabions, rock gabions. Now, in the US, it's illegal to make a seawall out of gabions because everyone knows they rust and collapse in 2 years, okay? But here in the Maldives, they're doing it on a big scale, in the Marshall Islands and other places. In this case, they were using the expensive plastic-coated material, cost many times more, but sooner or later, the plastic breaks and then you see the rust stain because the iron is decomposing and falling apart underneath. So sooner or later, this whole thing is going to fall apart. So that's what they were doing. That was Furanafushi. This was Ihuru when we started, and they were piling the sandbags up, first at one end of the island and then 6 months later the other end, and moving the sandbags back and forth. Of course, the sandbags break and then you get plastic all over your beach. So it is a problem. It's almost as expensive as pumping. I mean, Ihuru was spending a lot of money doing this, and all the resorts are that are pumping or dumping sand or dredging sand. So, and that's from Ihuru as well. So when we began, as I say, we came to Ihuru because of Aziz Hakim's work there. I'll come back to that. And at that point, Ahmed Mujtaba was the owner of the resort, and he was very supportive. And when we began, the beach on the south had disappeared. The trees were falling into the sea. Some of the cabins were about to start following it, and they were very worried. So this is the first place where we built a Biorock protective reef in order to try to stop the erosion. And this is Ihuru, how it looked at the time. So this is the first structure we built, the Ihuru barnacle that you saw Hassan Maniku's photos of. And when we put it in, there was, just a piece of steel in the ocean. Then it turned white as the limestone began to grow. Now let me backtrack. Before we began this, Aziz Hakim had spent years transplanting corals and cementing them down, and he had created a whole coral garden around Ihuru of transplanted corals. In my view, he was the world's top coral restorationist and coral transplanter at that time. And I had not seen anything at that time that was equivalent to what he did. So that's the reason why we came here. And as it turned white, the fish were attracted. The fish are very attracted by the electrical field, especially the juveniles. And it's the electrical current that does that. If you shut the current off, they go away, and you turn the current back on, they come back. So it's extremely interesting. Then we transplanted some corals onto it, and we got different fish at nighttime and different fish in the daytime, and they were permanent residents, some of them, and others just migrated and passed through. And we built large populations. The corals that we put on grew very quickly. At night, there are different species of fish. And this is, again, a picture of that first structure that we call the barnacle that we made in 1996. And I'm just showing pictures, so I'll move fairly quickly because there's a lot of pictures to show. And this is before bleaching. It looked absolutely beautiful. The bleaching hit in 1998. Now, in 1997, this is after this is the barnacle period. After the bleaching, almost all the corals survived on this structure. In the fore reef, something like 95% of the corals died. On top of the reef flat, to me, it was closer to 99% because I only remember seeing one large live coral on top of the reef. It was the perfect coral garden before. Now let me backtrack a little bit about the reefs in the Maldives. Is that the dive master at Ihuru was Robert, and I forget his last name. Sorry?
Schneider.
Schneider. Yes, I do. And he had been in some of the first dive shops in the Maldives. He had been here in the first or second dive shops. He'd been here a long time. So since I'm interested in long-term change in reefs, I immediately asked him, well, what have you seen? What changes have you personally seen here, the oldest divers here? And what he said was very interesting. He said, when we started diving here, there wasn't much coral. And it got better and better every year until 1998. Okay, and 1998 was the peak. Now, why was there not much corals when they began? And I know the reason. The reason is that I invented the method for predicting coral bleaching from satellite sea surface temperature data. And so I've been studying sea surface temperatures, worldwide. And I, developed the method for mapping out the anomalous temperatures. And when we first did that, what we found was the satellites that went up to measure sea surface temperature went up in 1982, and 1983 was the first year they had good data of mapping global sea surface temperatures. And what that data showed was that in 1983 and 84 El Nino, which is an unusual year because of the Indian Ocean oscillation, which takes every few years, coincided with the El Nino oscillation, and they added up in the Indian Ocean. So it got very hot here. And no one was diving or recording. There's no records of bleaching, but we know that severe bleaching happened across the Indian Ocean, from East Africa to Indonesia, to Thailand. There was heavy bleaching in Jakarta Bay in Indonesia, in Thailand, and other places. And all across the Pacific, the Eastern Pacific, Galapagos and Panama bleached very heavily, and almost all the corals died. And we'd never seen that before. And this is the first time we'd ever seen wide global scale coral bleaching. Every time before that, it had been a very local event due to local stress. But we're now seeing it's suddenly spreading. And we passed the threshold. We passed the tipping point for coral bleaching in the 1980s, worldwide. We had not ever seen that before. So that bleaching event, I believe, and the temperature that I have from the Maldives in that area show there was very high temperatures. And I think that a lot of the corals did die from bleaching, but no one was here diving to report that. But I think that's why, when Robert began diving, there was not much coral. So anyway, but after bleaching, almost all our corals survived, and that was really amazing because the reef around was pretty much all dead. So a few of them died here and there, but they did pretty well. And these are after bleaching pictures in 1999. This is a coral that spontaneously settled and grew that we cut off. So that was the one that we didn't put there. So we were getting high coral settlement as well on the material. And then we built three little structures that were nearby. He called them the Trinity just because there were three of them. And those are those ones there. And I'll just show you the pictures quickly. This is about 10 years later. Taken by Dr. Norman Quinn, who's a marine biologist who's working here at the Maldives Marine Research Institute, which, of course, I should have mentioned, as you all know, Hassan Manikou founded. He was the driving force behind that. And because what he recognized, and this is really important, he recognized for the Maldives to move ahead, it had to be based on a scientific understanding of the resources of this country. And the Maldives had to develop the ability to train their own people to develop the data that they needed to manage for the long term. And he would have been thrilled to be attending the Maldives Marine Science Symposium that we're just coming from, many of us here, because what he would have been thrilled to see is how many young Maldivian scientists giving excellent presentations. I mean, there were no people trained when he began that. You understand? Now there are a lot. And it's really due to his efforts, in my view. So anyway, so after that, then we built the structure we called the necklace. Now, the reason we called it the necklace was we were trying to protect that eroding beach that I showed you. So this structure we built was about, I think, 50 meters long, 150 feet or so, and it was about 10 to 15 feet wide and about 3 feet high. We built that right in front of that eroding beach. And now when we built it, as you see, when it went in, there was no corals, no limestone, and it was on bare rock. There was essentially no sand there. It was on the eroded rock platform. Now here's Aziz transplanting corals on top of that. And as the limestone grew, well, the fish moved in, but also the growing limestone cemented it to the bedrock. So now it's part of the rock itself. So it's not something loose sitting there. part of the reef. And we put a lot of corals on, and they started growing like mad. And this was in 1997, just after this when we started the project. And as I say, Aziz led the team doing that. We put corals on. And now, in 1998, the bleaching hit. And when we got back after the bleaching, this was what we found. Oh, this is before bleaching, so it's after bleaching. Now, temperature got very hot there, like 34, 35 degrees C or something. It was extremely hot. This is right on top of the reef flat in water that was just about a meter deep. And so some of these corals died on top, as you can see, because of the hot water and the sunlight. And some of them died, but most of them survived. And at the reef nearby, almost everything died. I mean, it was just tragic because it had been such a beautiful reef. But the ones that survived kept growing. You can see they're growing up from the sides. And they overgrew the dead areas, which normally they don't do. And so this is right after bleaching. Again, it's partial damage, but the ones that made it survived. The structures got bigger and heavier. They attached themselves solidly to the seafloor. And it wasn't quite so pretty then as it became later, because, as I say, these corals were just recovering from bleaching from very severe stress. But it's clear that the Biorock process caused much higher survival, anywhere from 16 to 50 times higher survival than the natural reef nearby. That was amazing. No one had ever seen that method for protecting corals from bleaching, or some of them. So the structure became very massive and heavy. I mean, this is, after 2 years. It was probably growing too fast in my view, but at any rate, the fish moved in. They loved it. Moray eels moved in. Rays moved in. There was big stingrays living in them. And so the coral fragments then started spreading. This is a very fast-growing coral. And you can just see they're just growing right over the structure. And at this point, the structure was solidly cemented to the bottom, and sand was building up under it. Okay, so instead of the sand eroding, we were causing deposition of sand. At this point, the power was still on in 1999. Now, at that point, the hotel was sold to a foreign investor. And the first thing they did was shut the power off. So they wouldn't let us monitor it or maintain it or repair it. Okay? They hadn't built it, and it was really, really sad. So we were never able to get back. So this is 2 years after they shut the power off. Okay? And but you can see here, this coral, which had been dead on top, it's almost completely grown back over it. All these little pieces have grown like mad. Now, but they're not growing at an accelerated rate. At this point, they're ordinary corals, not growing much faster than normal. And we can accelerate corals. Normally, we grow them about 3 to 5 times faster than normal. But we've got in Indonesia up to 20 times faster. That's too fast, because corals that grow too fast are weak. The skeletons are not as strong and all that. So we try to go at only 3 to 5 times faster in general. But you can see what the results were. And it had no power at this point for 2 years, but the structure was intact, and so were the corals. And they were lucky. They had no bleaching for 18 years. Yeah. Okay. Okay, when they had bleaching, now, it's my understanding that 98% of the corals died in the 2016 bleaching. They were not protected by electricity anymore because they had cut the power off. And so at that point, our project was killed. Except the structure's still there protecting the beach, because that's still there. That's solid rock, even though the corals were dead. These are materials that Wolf cut out of them. We hacksawed them out. Here's a coral that I basically wrapped a wire around with electricity, and the corals just grew right over it. Another coral that we wrapped with wire. So we're able to transmit the electricity long distances, very low current. And you see there's a wire there with limestone growing over it, and the corals just incorporating it inside. So the beach grew 15 meters wider. That was that eroded beach that you saw with the sandbags. It grew. And there you see the Biorock reef there, and here they're measuring a new beach that grew by itself. And that was really amazing. When we began, this building was about to collapse into the sea. There was a wall of sandbags there, and Mujtaba told us that they would not be able to save the building. They were going to have to tear it down because it was about to collapse into the sea. Well, we saved the building by growing the beach back. So that was really remarkable. And so here's a photograph. This is the Biorock Reef, that dark line. That's the new beach there. And this is the dead reef where almost everything died from bleaching in 1998. Yeah. The result of that is all the fish that were in the reef, they don't like to be around dead corals. They want living corals. So they all migrated into the Biorock Reef because that's where all the live corals were. And for many years, this was the best snorkeling reef in the Maldives because all the house reefs had been pretty much killed. But here we had a reef that was full of corals and fish right in front of the beach. It was the only place that had it. So at this point, tourists would come from other resorts so they could snorkel at Ihuru just to see the corals and fish. Okay? So, and at this point, I estimate it would take about 15 years for the reefs around Malé to recover, and that was about right. You know, that was my guess at that time, and it was pretty close. It mostly came back by 2016, and then it got wiped out again. So, oops, sorry. Anyway, so what we're using the power supply, using chargers on land, using the diesel power supply that the hotel had, not solar panels. So now we've greatly improved our technology. The chargers we were using are very inefficient. They waste about half the energy that goes in. Now we're custom building our own power supplies that are about 96 or 97% energy efficient. They're not wasting energy as heat. And also, they are smart power supplies in the sense that they are continually recording what power they're putting out, data logging that, and transmitting it in real time. So we can measure how quickly they're going. We couldn't do that in those days, unfortunately. But we've greatly improved the technology now. This is 11 years after we built the structure. Again, it had no power most of the time, but Dr. Norman Quinn, who was visiting the Marine NMRI, took these pictures that he sent to me, and sort of a wide-angle lens, so it's a bit distorted, but you see how well they were doing, the corals. Even though they were not getting electricity, they were still doing very well. And they got huge. These are Aziz's pictures now. Again, this is like nearly 9 years after they shut the power off, but the corals were doing very beautifully, although not growing as fast as they would if they'd had electricity, but you can see what happened. And you can see the sand that accumulated behind the reef and built up the beach, and that's a picture I used on the cover, and these are Aziz's pictures. And here in this case, I mean, you can see how big it was. I think that's a little too fast, but anyway. So that's the new beach. Now, when the tsunami came, the beach and reef were not affected. Aziz was. He was washed into the sea, and he had to swim back. Okay, but there was no damage to the beach or the reef. We're lucky we didn't lose Aziz, that's all I can say. And then we also built a project at Babin Faru nearby, and this was in deeper water on the slope, and we built a huge, we called it the lotus because it was shaped like a big flower. And these are some of Aziz's pictures in 1998. And you get an idea of what we did there. So the corals we put on just spread like mad and grew beautifully and so forth, as long as the power was on, but when the power was cut off on this one too, unfortunately. So, okay, well, the point I want to make is this is a technology that we invented in Jamaica, we then applied in Panama, and then here in the Maldives, and later Seychelles and other places. We've done about 600 or 700 Biorock reefs all across the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, and Southeast Asia. Most of them are in Indonesia. Almost all are in Indonesia, because that's where we've had the most response from students. We've trained hundreds of Indonesian students, and they want to go out and build reefs and work with communities to do that. The problem is, although the government of Indonesia supports reef restoration as a fisheries management tool, they don't fund it. Okay? The money all goes to bureaucrats, and they spend it all. But it doesn't wind up reaching the people who want to grow reefs. So there are no jobs for these people. They're not hiring them to go out and work with their own communities and grow back their reefs and fisheries, which is really what we want to see. But that would happen with the right policies. So in my view, here are some of the applications that are available here in the Maldives. This is a life-enhancing technology because we make things grow faster and healthier. It also increases the biodiversity because things settle all around. It's not just on the structure. This is the interesting thing. In Indonesia, the projects we built were not on the dead reef. The reef that we built projects were, again, died in 1998 from the same bleaching event that hit here. But we grew the reefs on the sand below the reef, but the whole reef sprang back by itself because the electrical field stimulated the spontaneous settlement of corals, and the whole dead reef grew back without our putting any corals on. It grew back by itself in about 5 years in Indonesia. Yeah, so it was in Bali. So anyway, so this is a way that people here can grow islands, can grow reefs, and without healthy reefs, there is no Maldives. I mean, without the reefs growing faster than erosion, erosion never sleeps. Okay? Politicians do, but erosion never sleeps, So this is something that we could be using here in the Maldives to protect islands like Hulhumale that, are a meter above sea level, and they're going to be flooded sooner, if not later. Okay? I mean, that's pretty inevitable. And in addition, you can increase the biodiversity. Now, the interesting thing is, they say fish crowd into them. But we get different species of fish in different shaped structures because each fish is looking for a different sort of habitat. Lobsters, octopus, we can build habitat for each species. Oysters, we grow a lot of oysters. We're doing oyster projects. And this works in any marine habitat because it depends on salty water being electrically conductive. It doesn't work in fresh water, but it works in water that's half salty, not as quickly, but it does work. It works in cold water. The last project I did was in Chile, in Patagonia, in southern Chile, in the fjords. So we can work in almost any marine ecosystem, and it seems to stimulate every organism we've looked at. We don't see negative effects. So it's a way of restoring the islands themselves. And I mean, frankly, if you don't do this here in the Maldives, you're going to lose your island sooner or later. I mean, that's the fact. So global sea level rise and global warming are out of control because the countries that are putting CO2 into the atmosphere refuse to cut back on that. And it's not just cutting back. We're now at the point that even if we stopped all fossil fuel use tonight, we can't stop the increase in temperature or sea level rise. It's too late. So we have to actively be removing CO2. And that's one thing we can contribute to. I think I'll come back to that a little later. But basically, the Maldives and all the island nations have got to stop global warming. I warned at the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. I briefed the small island developing states delegation. I told them if they didn't stop global warming at that meeting, if they signed a treaty that did not stop global warming, they'd lose most of their coral reefs in the next 20 years or so. And that's what happened. They signed on to a treaty that did not protect the small island developing states from climate change. Basically, what happened, I mean, it's really sad to say, but our political leaders were told they should sign the treaty and not cause any problems, otherwise they might lose their foreign aid. So they were essentially forced to sign a treaty that was not in their own interests, in my view, okay, which is very sad. But anyway, this is the only technology we have, but it's not going to be enough. It gives us a breathing space until CO2 is brought under control. And to do that, we have to reduce emissions. We also have to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And it's past that. I mean, I think we're at the point where we've got to start reflecting sunlight back to space and something to cool the Earth down. Because otherwise, what we're headed for is overshoot, runaway overshoot in temperature, in sea level rise, and the disastrous effects. I think you know that Monday of this week was the hottest day in world history ever recorded. And it beat the record that was set the day before on Sunday. Okay, and we'll probably see more records in the coming week. Okay, it's out of control. and the world is basically turning a blind eye to it because they're wrapped up with killing each other or whatever they do. It's crazy. So anyway, this is the only technology we know of that can help the Maldives, save the Maldives in the long run, but it would have to be applied on a large scale. That takes resources that don't exist at this point in time, but it gives a window of hope. So we can use renewable energy, and that the Maldives has plenty of, with particularly sunlight, and that way we can do that. We can also produce building materials in the sea. Okay, the next project I'm going to do is going to be in Zanzibar. Zanzibar, like the Maldives, traditionally built its houses out of coral rock cemented with quicklime. Okay, the old stone town in Zanzibar is all like old Maldivian construction. Right? They killed a lot of reefs there too, and so we're going to try to start producing building materials there. But that's something we'd like to see the Maldives doing. The Maldives could be using this technology on a large scale and saving a lot of money and saving the islands themselves. So now, well, the next El Nino, which is going to start soon. At this point, I should have changed that. But I thought the El Nino was starting, but this one has fizzled out. The last La Nina fizzled out, and this El Nino is fizzling out. But we're going to get a big one sooner or later. So that's inevitable. And so there isn't really much time. So it's an essential insurance policy. Now, the other thing is that one of the cheapest ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere is what we call blue carbon. That is to say, the carbon of growing ecosystems that are sucking CO2 and building biomass, which is carbon. But we're killing our reefs, we're killing our seagrasses, except here in the Maldives, they're spreading because of sewage. That's another story. But worldwide, we're losing seagrasses, we're losing mangroves, we're losing salt marshes. They're just being destroyed deliberately in many cases. Half of the mangroves in Southeast Asia have been destroyed with funds from places like the World Bank in the name of development. Okay, what they do is they destroy the mangroves, they put in fish ponds or shrimp ponds. The fish and shrimp then all die of disease, so they abandon it. And at that point where there used to be a mangrove, now there's water. And that causes the sea to move inland, in some cases by kilometers. Around Jakarta, for instance, you see that. So what we want to do is grow back these marine ecosystems in order to store more carbon. And the most important sink of carbon is the organic carbon in the sediments, in mangroves and seagrasses. And we increase the growth of seagrasses and mangroves as well. I'm not going to show that here, but we've done that around the world. So we can increase that and increase the storage of carbon in the sediment and the underground growth of the roots as well as the above ground growth. So it works, I say, in any marine ecosystem. But it's a way that we could be regenerating our ecosystems and solving the CO2 problem at the same time. And blue carbon is probably the most effective carbon sink in terms of the amount of carbon you could put into the ground, into the soil, or into the sediment per unit area at the lowest cost. I don't think any other method is going to compete with that, but it's not being done on a large scale at this point. It could be done, and I hope it's done here. So we view it as an insurance policy, and we would. I'm going to stop here, but I think this is something that Hassan Manikou understood the implications of. He never saw it because those pictures in 1997, he was struck down shortly after, and he died before he could continue. No one else followed through, unfortunately. So we've just done the first new project in the Maldives in 25 years at Bala Resort, and Emmeline here and Agni in the back are the people who are running those projects. They just gave a talk at the Maldives Marine Science Symposium, and they're getting corals growing faster, recovering from bleaching, the fish are crowding in, and all that. So what I'm showing you here is the old work that was done in the Maldives, in 1997, and then stopped and not continued. It's very sad, but we need to pick up from where we left off. And had Hassan lived, I think you would have seen all the stuff being developed at a much faster rate than has happened. So we do miss his leadership. So anyway, Wolf Hilberts and Aziz Hakim and Norman Quinn are the ones who provided these pictures. Aziz, of course, was the master coral grower. He's retired from that now. And then, of course, Hassan Manikou, because this would not have happened without him. So It's a pleasure to present this stuff here in the Maldives for the first time. We've never had an opportunity to present what we did. So I'm just showing the old pictures. I mean, now we've advanced the technology much more, and we can build structures of any size or shape, but obviously the bigger it is, the more materials you need and the more electricity you need and the higher the cost. But the point is they could be designed, and my hope really, what we had hoped to do in 1996 was to set up a training workshop in Biorock technology here in the Maldives, and we'd wanted to hold it in 1997, 1998, but it never happened because of Hassan's unfortunate, illness. It never happened, and we still have never had that training workshop here in the Maldives. We've had many in Indonesia, but not here. And this is something we would really like to see. We're ready to work with the Maldives to train people to just go out and apply it. And that's as technology is, we had a patent on it, the patent expired, but it doesn't matter. The point is the knowledge is freely available to people. They just have to be trained to do it properly. We do have a number of imitators who copy our work, but they're not trained and they don't do it right, and it doesn't work for a lot of reasons, fundamental mistakes that they make. And there've been a couple examples of that here in the Maldives of imitation projects that have not worked. And I think where someone here has worked on one of those. Where is he? Yes. Okay, now he, in the corner there, he's the person who Aziz trained to maintain the Ihuru projects. And he was there when they cut the power off, and he saw for himself how fast the corals were growing and how they slowed down after they cut the power off. And then he saw an imitation project done at another atoll that didn't work at all. Okay? So at any rate, we want to train people to do it properly, and we hope we can do this soon. Now, I gave a talk to the Maldives Blue Economy Partnership Forum last year, and I showed these pictures, but at that meeting, there were 4 people in attendance. 3 of them had the screen shut off, so you couldn't tell if they'd gone to sleep or were in the next room or whatever. Only 1 person, you could see the face, and there were no questions of any significance, so it's clear the people were all very young people. I love young people, but they were clearly not people who were decision makers. They were, entry-level people in their 20s, and nothing came out of that. We were proposing that the Maldives set up training programs for Biorock to train the young people here to go out and save their own environment. And we still hope that can happen at some point. We hope soon. The sooner the better. So there's more information. I think that this is being filmed, and Hume is going to post it on the web, so it'll be available for everyone in the Maldives to see. Not in Divehi, unfortunately, because I don't speak Divehi, but most people here understand enough English to follow what I'm saying. And so we are going to post this whole presentation. We hope it is widely disseminated in the Maldives. And we hope we can pick up, again, from where we left off 25 years ago. We are in Vela, but that's just one private resort far away. And the key is not to protect the resorts. Well, for economic reasons, there are reasons to protect the resorts, but our hope is to see this technology used by the Maldivian people to save the inhabited islands. That's, for us, the most important application. So we'll post this on the web, and that's it. So thank you very much. Now, be happy to take questions. I'm if anyone wants to discuss this. There are many more applications. I'm only showing pictures from the Maldives here. Okay, we have millions of pictures from all around the world. Each project is different size or shape, different situation. We design each project in a site-specific way with local partners. We try to work when we can with community-managed environmental groups. There are not very many, because in most countries, communities are not allowed to manage their own environment. Okay, that power has been taken away from them. And so it's very difficult. Right? Bali in Indonesia is one place where traditional village law supersedes national law. So the village can decide what they want to do, and they don't care what the government says. But that's not true in most countries. People don't have decision-making capacity on what they need to do. So anyhow, we just hope we can work with Maldivian communities to apply this technology wherever it's needed. So, Thank you. Thank you for coming. Yes.